also known as Gravity Boys Shield Gang, is one of the most interesting, talented, and unique groups in all of music, covering so many different genres over the decade of their existence, making massive influences in music, fashion, and just general aesthetics used by so many artists today. With that, I absolutely love 90% of what Drain Gang has put out, so in this video I'm going to be covering every single project by every single member of Drain Gang, all the way from Bladee Ecco2K's noise punk group in 2007 to Thaiboy's Back to Life in 2023. But before I get into that, I will quickly establish who makes up Drain Gang. Drain Gang consists of 3 vocalists and 2 producers. The vocalists being Bladee, most known for his projects Icedancer, 333, Gluee, and Eversince; Ecco2K, most known for his projects E and Pixie; and Thaiboy Digital, most known for his projects Legendary Member and Tiger. Then for producers, there's Whitearmor, responsible for classic beats such as Western Union and Calcium, and Yung Sherman, known for classic beats such as Play 'Em Like Atari and Delete. Yung Sherman is also part of Sadboys with Young, Lean, and Good, 2 artists who have a lot of work with Drain Gang and will be mentioned throughout the video. Now to get into the actual music. Jävla Äckel Demo 2007 is an extremely short demo tape of Ecco and Bladee's noisecore punk band in the 2000s. For the content, it's sort of interesting to hear Bladee and Ecco so early on, but besides that, this really sucks. The demos are recorded in the shittiest quality ever, and it sounds like they can't even play the instruments they're trying to play. Rippin Private Bowls is a mixtape released by Whitearmor under the name DJ Cannabiz in 2011, before he even had the Whitearmor name. This is an absolute hidden gem, being lost media for ages until being found about 2 years ago. This tape is absolutely phenomenal in my opinion, being full of these sample-heavy cloud rap beats. It really shows Whitearmor's natural talent as a producer even really early on, as this is the first piece of music he ever put out, and it's just phenomenal. The sample chops are evidently purposeful and intelligent, backed by some really unique drum patterns that create some absolute earworms. If you haven't heard this already, I really recommend checking it out. GTBSG, being the acronym for Gravity Boys Shield Gang, is the debut of Drain Gang as a group, being a 33-minute compilation album of singles from members of Drain Gang. With that, this record has some Drain Gang classics such as Ecco's Hold Me Down Like Gravity and Bladee and Ecco's Bleach. But not only the classics on here are great, but every track on here is a showcase of great early Drain Gang. The first track I want to talk about of GTBSG is my personal favorite from the record, Ecco's Hold Me Down Like Gravity. This track has one of the most insane hooks that I've ever heard, and I've had it stuck in my head for days at a time. The lines, are just magical to me. This hook is talking about how Ecco feels like he can't experience life to its full extent due to his depression, leading him to live life in 240p. Then him asking this girl to hold him down like gravity is him asking this girl to keep Ecco grounded / keep him in the right state of mind so he doesn't fall deeper into this sadness. Alternatively, this line could be interpreted as saying the exact opposite, in that this relationship is toxic and this girl is holding Ecco down from getting better and reaching happiness. It's a bit of a stretch, but you could further solidify this meaning by taking this line from the verse, I don't want to know the truth, don't expect it to be told, which could be talking about how this girl has created a toxic cycle of lying to Ecco, where he just expects it at this point. Another track I love off GTBSG is Bleach by Bladee featuring Ecco. This track has one of the best early Drain Gang beats, being the work of Whitearmor. It has this instrumental section that lets this really nice melody play out, giving the track some breathing room between Bladee and Ecco's performances. On the topic of Bladee and Ecco's performances, they are both phenomenal, having some great chemistry together with seamless mic passing, along with both of them absolutely floating on this beat. The last track I want to mention from this mixtape is Make You Bleed, which is a track from Thaiboy and Bladee with a beat from Whitearmor that's so infectious and severely underrated in the group's discography. Not only this, but Bladee and Thaiboy have the perfect laid-back performances for this beautiful beat, just creating like the best atmosphere for a song just ever. GTBSG was a great start for Drain Gang, showcasing great performances from all members. Not only in the hits like Bleach, but also in the deeper cuts like Make You Bleed. And when I say all members, I do mean all members, as both Whitearmor and Yung Sherman have some of their best beats on this record. Gluee is Bladee's debut mixtape and the first solo project released by any Drain Gang member since the formation of the group in 2013. To me, Gluee is easily the rawest project in all of Drain Gang's discography, having this really early cloud rap sound that would eventually be perfected on Eversince 2 years later. But this imperfection creates this really interesting charm that makes this project so uniquely lovable. eBay is a prime example of this, having a phenomenal Whitearmor beat then paired with super fun performances from Ecco, Thaiboy, and Bladee, where there's some great chemistry with each other, passing the mic back and forth throughout the song seamlessly. Especially when Ecco comes on with his verse, it's just so perfect. eBay perfectly showcases the magical talent of the group so early on, bringing this super unique sound to the table that I don't believe anyone has ever sufficiently recreated. Like, I don't think anyone else could ever make another eBay. Another unbelievable track on Gluee is the opener, Delete Intro, which is such a great melodic track from Bladee with one of Yung Sherman's best beats that has just so much power. It just hits so hard because it's paired with so many vocal layers. On top of this, there's a great short Thaiboy verse at the end of the track that makes the song just that much better. Despite his short runtime of 28 minutes, Gluee is an amazing start to Blade's amazing career, having beautifully unique production matched with just as unique vocals. Then on top of this, Gluee has some pretty great features from all members of Drain Gang, like on the track eBay. Bladee wasn't the only member of Drain Gang to release their debut mixtape in 2014, as so did Thaiboy Digital with his mixtape Tiger. Tiger is a great Drain Gang project and really proves that Thaiboy is just as great as the rest of Drain Gang, despite being often overlooked. Just listen to the opening track Haters Broke, that's definitely a top 15 Drain Gang track. Thaiboy is so amazing on this Whitearmor beat, having a super fun performance on what might be the best beat to ever come out of Drain Gang. Another classic to come out of this mixtape is Diamonds, which features Young Lean. But it feels a lot more like a Young Lean track featuring Thaiboy, as Young Lean takes up most of the track's runtime. But that doesn't matter, as when Thaiboy comes in, he drops such a hard verse, using this really cool vocal inflection. The last track I want to talk about of Tiger is GTBSG featuring Bladee. The production and vocals make it sound like it could have been on Gluee, with Whitearmor production very much reminiscent of that record. Lyrically, this track is probably the strongest on the mixtape, having a great verse from Bladee. On this verse, Bladee talks about how despite his great success in music and financially, he can't seem to reach success personally in being happy, and how he'd give all his money away if it meant he could be happy. From here, the verse further describes this depression Bladee feels, talking about every day feeling the same, insecurity he has in his appearance, and how he uses consumerism to try to drown his sadness. Tiger is an amazing release from Thaiboy and arguably his best project. With intriguingly unique production, amazing vocal performances, fun songwriting, and quality features from Young Lean and Drain Gang CEO himself, Bladee. Lord of the Jewels Return of the Goon is the second mixtape from Thaiboy, and definitely a huge drop off in quality from his previous mixtape Tiger. This mixtape sort of feels like Thaiboy was trying to make club bangers, but it failed pretty horribly. I think the reason I really don't like this tape is everything on here just feels so messy, especially in comparison to the smooth production and vocals on Tiger. Then on top of that, Thaiboy's vocals on this are horrific, having way too much reverb. This is especially evident on the track Roll a Dice, where it's actually funny how bad it is. It sounds like he's recording in a cave. Crush Resist CR 2015 is Ecco's debut EP, being a super harsh and abrasive noise project. Though there are remnants of cloud rap hidden deep in the abrasive industrial sounds of the record, it's mostly sonically extremely disconnected from anything else made by Drain Gang. With this extremely harsh and abrasive sound, it is pretty hard to listen to. It's not even like I don't like noise stuff, it's just here, it just feels loud for the sake of being loud. Though I don't really care for this project much, it is still interesting to hear, as it shows the beginnings of how intriguingly polarizing of an artist Ecco would become. With Ecco's masterpiece Pixie having elements of Crush Resist within it, specifically on the closing track Big Air. Every Friday's Halloween. Eversince is Blade's debut album and the first Drain Gang project released in 2016. Eversince used to be my least favorite Bladee project by far, as I think it's probably his least successful release, maybe tied with Gluee in that regard. But as I came back to it over and over again, it really clicked. I don't know how I didn't see this record for how great it is initially, but now that I've returned to it, I'm so glad that I have, as Eversince is a cloud rap masterpiece, having some of Drain Gang's best production like on tracks Who Goes There, So What, and Skin. The first track I want to talk about off Eversince is X'd Out. X'd Out, produced by Whitearmor, is a classic Bladee track that, while sounding nice, is also lyrically very strong. The track talks about bad relationships Blade's had, along with mentions of depression. It first talks about this depression in the opening line, if you're not bleeding, you're drained out. This is then repeated in various other sections of the track, which is a line saying that if you're not bleeding like him, not feeling the suffering, you're not truly drained emotionally and mentally like Bladee is. Following this, the track brings up the topic of bad relationships and how Bladee deals with shitty people in his life by cutting them off, or said in his words, Xing them out. Another line that builds on this topic is I'm letting go, you're being let down, which is Bladee saying how he feels he lets people down by cutting them off, but nonetheless it's what he believes is right for himself, further solidified by lines talking about how this person broke Blade's trust. The second track I want to talk about is the closer to Eversince, that being Skin, which to me sort of feels like Blade's Agony, if that makes sense. It sort of feels the same in its relatively minimalistic production, paired with Blade's delivery that sort of feels the same as Lean's delivery on Agony. Anyways, to get into the actual track, Skin is a really emotionally vulnerable Bladee track, talking about self-harm, isolation, and depression. Bladee opens the track talking of his fear of returning to his lowest point, and how that low point caused him trauma that has permanently scarred him. From here, there are more lines about Blade's helplessness with his mental state, in lines like, when it's from inside, you know you can't defend against it. Saying how when he's dealing with internal issues, he can't help himself and just falls into a deep depression. Following this verse, Skin leads into the chorus, which describes cutting a rope, which is most likely a representation for a noose. Then Bladee says he's growing wings, representing him dying and becoming an angel. The rest of this chorus talks about his self-harm habits, him falling out of love, and just overall feeling like he's a failure in life. The track then leads into a brief bridge that transitions into the chorus for the second time, closing off the album with its title in the final line.
White, black, Eversince.
Eversince is a beautifully vulnerable album from Bladee, with some of his most emotional songwriting to date, paired with some masterful cloud rap production from Whitearmor that builds this atmosphere that feels so isolated, dark, and hollow. Rip Bladee is a pretty run-of-the-mill Bladee release, but definitely still a quality collection of songs, having some absolute hits like MJ. Though MJ is pretty great, in my opinion the best track on the EP is easily 7-Eleven, which perfectly contrasts the rest of the track list with very minimal production in comparison to the other beats on this project. One last thing I want to mention about this EP is a Damn Killers feature on Psycho. That just matches the beat's energy so well and is a highlight of the EP in my opinion. Also, I love his damn ad-libs. AVP is a collaboration album with Bladee Thaiboy Digital, and it has the most disgusting Drain Gang album cover that has ever been conceived. With that, I also find it to be one of the weaker Drain Gang releases, with every track being decent, but not really having any standout tracks, so I don't really come back to it too often. So due to the pretty average track list that this album has, I don't really have anything to talk about, as there's nothing I really love on this project. Like, they're all just average Drain Gang tracks, if not subpar, and for that reason are forgettable, making this project as a whole forgettable. Like, I never see anyone talk about AVP unless it's talking about how bad it is. First Drain Gang release of 2017 was Blade's 3-track EP Plastic Surgery, and this is a great EP, having some phenomenal Bladee tracks. The title track especially shows some great lyricism from Bladee and Ecco. The song begins with Ecco talking about these extreme shifts in mood he has throughout his day-to-day life. From here, the rest of the track's main theme is Ecco and Bladee describing a relationship, and this feeling of needing to change themselves for this person, using the metaphor of plastic surgery. Then for the other tracks on the EP, there's It Sucks and Doorman. Personally, It Sucks sticks out a lot more to me than Doorman. As well, Doorman feels like a pretty run-of-the-mill Bladee track. It Sucks has such an insane beat that has so much energy that Bladee matches perfectly on the track, with him flowing so smoothly. The first and only solo project to come out of Drain Gang's other producer Yung Sherman so far is the instrumental EP Innocence. I think Innocence is pretty cool, being dynamic and just overall having interesting sounds that make these tracks work well as standalone instrumentals rather than being something that feels like it needs vocals over it. What this EP is genre-wise, I just describe it as electronic personally, but on the music websites it's called Wave, and I don't really know what that means. Anyways, this is a pretty cool EP from Yung Sherman, with tracks like I Don't Care, really showing his talent as a producer. So if you like Drain Gang and Sad Boys, I really recommend giving this a shot. Standing for Suicide or Sacrifice, S.O.S is an EP from Thaiboy that I think is one of his best pieces of work. S.O.S presents some really interesting ideas, such as implementing electropop into his classic rap sound, working perfectly with Thaiboy's style. An example of experimentation paying off extremely well in this project is the track Magic, which is one of the many examples of Thaiboy really knowing how to write a hook. This EP is also unique for Thaiboy, as unlike most of his projects, this EP has a consistent theme/concept. Thaiboy briefly explains this theme in an interview with Dazed. All the songs are sort of about this one girl, and the current situation of my life at the time. It was a suicide or sacrifice situation. D&G is the second Drain Gang collaboration album between all 3 vocalist members, and is in my opinion the weakest out of the 3. Don't get me wrong, I think it's really great, it's just that it feels a lot less special than GTBSG or Trash Island. While GTBSG and Trash Island feel like culminations of the group's current sound, D&G simply feels like a bunch of Drain Gang tracks thrown together. It's not even that these tracks are bad by any means, it's just the project lacks the cohesiveness that the other 2 have. Anyways, to talk about what's good about this project. There are some really great tracks on here, especially from Ecco, with Black Boy being one of his best songs lyrically. Black Boy, is obviously implied by the title, is a track retrospectively talking about his younger self, specifically how he felt growing up as a black kid in predominantly white Sweden. Another track that's really great is Thaiboy and Lean's Can't Trust, which is nothing short of perfection. Backed by a Woesome and Whitearmor beat, Lean opens the track with a quality verse where he rides this beat beautifully. That's until there's a beat drop where Thaiboy goes absolutely insane on this chorus, having an undeniably amazing hook that just blows my mind every time. Great hooks are truly Thaiboy's talent, having nearly all the best hooks in all of Drain Gang's discography. That's all I really have to say about this record. Sorry for not touching on it for too long. I just don't think it's anything too interesting, so I really don't know what to say besides highlighting the few great tracks that are on the album. Dreaming of You Coral is the return of Ecco and Blade's noise punk band 10 years later, and just like the first Krossad tape, it's pretty awful, being pretty similar to the songs from the first project, but even lower quality somehow. This time being recorded on a Sony Ericsson T610. Working on Dying is a collaborative mixtape with Bladee and producer collective Working on Dying. If you don't know, some of the more well-known producers in the collective are Filthy, Benny X, Oogie Mane, and at the time Forza. I love this record so much as it really gave Bladee a new sound to work with, creating a really standout album in his discography. On top of this, Bladee sounds really great on this. Like on Best Buy, it's this sort of aggressive delivery and it's so funny. Another track where Bladee is amazing is Under Your Spell, which I think is one of my favorite Bladee songs of all time. This beat is actually the smoothest shit I've ever heard, and then that paired with Bladee absolutely floating on this beat, it just creates the perfect song that I can play over and over again. The features are also pretty good on this record, with especially Cherry Bracelets being great performances from Ecco and especially Lean, with him having a super catchy chorus. But it's not only these individual performances that are great, but the chemistry as a whole on this track, especially the second half of this track with the passing the mic feeling like it's Brockhampton levels of smooth. The last track I want to mention from this record is Backstreet Boys, as this track has the second best beat on the record in my opinion, only second to Under Your Spell. Though Bladee does perform well on the track, to me it really feels like this beat was made for Black Cray, as his verse feels so much stronger than anything Bladee does on the track.
She don't like that, but it's cool, man. Take it to the face, I need an ice pack. Hit them all.
Red Light is Blade's third studio album and I feel his most run-of-the-mill release. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's at all bad, just more so what you'd expect from Bladee, with him not really trying anything new on this record. Unlike all his other records, where I feel like he tries some new sound every time. With this lack of significant change, I feel this gave Bladee time to perfect his sound heard on Eversince, with this album having perfect track after perfect track, giving us some absolute classic Bladee tracks like Obedient, I'm Goofy, and Decay. The first track I want to talk about off this record is Obedient featuring Ecco. I'll just start by saying it's so deserved for this to be one of Blade's biggest songs. This track is actually insane. Backed by this super bouncy production from Whitearmor, Bladee comes in with this flow that I adore, and he just keeps going and going for a pretty long verse in comparison to the average Drain Gang verse. He then seamlessly passes the mic to Ecco, where he performs just as well, if not better than Bladee. Not only does this track sound great, but the songwriting on this is also really dense. I specifically want to focus on Ecco's verse. Ecco's verse talks about drowning himself in material items, substances, and empty relationships just to feel something, as he has no sense of self and only exists to himself visually. Alternatively, this line could be talking about derealization/disassociation that Ecco feels from the drugs he takes, a theme heavily mentioned on his album E that came out the following year. Another song I love that's on Red Light is the closer to the album I'm Goofy, which is a really lighthearted track compared to a lot of the other tracks on the album, with the track talking about being silly and goofy. I think why I like this track so much is not only because lyrically it's so fun, but also the Whitearmor production on this is amazing. The guitar at the start of the track is really cool, then dropping into this great trap beat just hits so hard every time for me. Another track on this record that has great production is Steve Jobs, as this track has this pluck that really just does something for me. Then lyrically, this track similar to I'm Goofy is very unserious. Steve Jobs talks about how good of a businessman Bladee is, comparing himself to Steve Jobs, saying he is like Steve Jobs, in the sense that like him, he's irreplaceable due to his raw talent in making lots of money. Red Light is another classic Bladee record that really perfects a sound heard before from him, leading to some of his best tracks like Obedient. Along with this, Whitearmor has some of his best production ever on this project, having some absolutely generational beats. Despite its short runtime of 2 tracks, Exile has a strong narrative that is framed by the titles of the songs and the EP itself. Exile begins with Trial, where Bladee talks about his downward spiral and how all his problems are piling up on him, with the lines like,
I'm falling off again.
These emotions he feels tends to lead him to cause problems for others, or at least feel like he's a problem for others, which consequently makes him feel like he deserves to be exiled. The second track's sentence then displays the consequences of the actions spoken of on Trial. These consequences being Bladee having substance abuse problems and various other issues he faces. Along with Exile, 2 months earlier, Bladee released another 2-track EP, Sunset and Silver City, that I still need to mention, but since they're pretty run-of-the-mill Bladee tracks sonically and lyrically, I don't really have much to say about them. Icedancer is another collaborative mixtape with Bladee and a producer collective. This time that group being Rip Squad, which includes members Rip, Lucy, Distance, Decay, and Skies. Just like Blade's last collaborative mixtape with new producers, it once again gave him a new sound to work with, creating a refreshing mixtape that is personally one of my favorite Drain Gang projects. Rip Squad beats have this lush style that I absolutely love, using these deep 808s paired with these snappy drum patterns that use so many hi-hats, creating this super interesting sound that is so danceable, and on top of that, a perfect sound for Blade's vocal style. This leads to Bladee doing amazingly on every single beat on this mixtape. The features on this are equally as great as the production and performances by Bladee, with Thaiboy in my opinion having the best performance of the whole album. Thaiboy makes the opening of Side by Side just perfect, with the beat building up into this burst of sound that is so powerful when put together with this super catchy Thaiboy hook that makes you want to listen over and over again. This beautiful burst of sound is created by the aforementioned amazing combination of super deep 808s and super interesting hi-hat patterns. This Thaiboy feature isn't the only feature I love on this, as I also love the Cartier God feature on Cartier God Icedancer intermission, as he makes it just such a fun track with this really chaotic beat messed with a super fun performance from Cartier God. Especially on the chorus, which I just find so catchy due to his laid back performance that doesn't feel lazy but instead intentionally laid back. Now that I've talked about feature performances that I love on this record, it's only fair to talk about Blade's performances. One of my favorites is Frosty the Snowman, which was released as a Christmas special the year before. This track has such a great delivery from Bladee, following the melody of the Christmas song, which is then followed by him floating on this beat, as he does on literally every single track on this record. The final track I want to mention off Icedancer is Waster. Waster is a prime example of the chemistry Bladee and Rip2K have. Bladee uses this sort of breathy inflection over this energizing beat that paired together creates a fantastically unique sound. I think Icedancer is an extremely strong project from Bladee, having some of the best production I've ever heard him on, along with all around great and energetic performances from Bladee and the features across the mixtape. Due to this, I really hope we get another Bladee and Rip2K project, which we sort of did for The Fool, but like, you know what I mean, like the actual full collective. Trash Island is the third and most recent group project from Drain Gang, being a collaboration project between Thaiboy, Bladee, and Ecco. This record is great, and I think the best out of the 3 Drain Gang albums, with Trash Island being concise, only having a 22-minute runtime full of great performances from every single member. On the subject of production, this album sonically feels like a precursor to E, with having this very similar cold production, also primarily from Whitearmor, mirroring E in that sense. This album is also one of the first times we hear Ecco do a higher voice from his typical low voice heard on earlier projects. Anyways, to get into the track list, my favorite track on this record by far and the most obvious pick is Western Union, as this is just the perfect Drain Gang track. It opens with his intro and chorus from Ecco that is arguably one of his best performances of all time, followed by back-to-back short verses from Bladee and Thaiboy that mesh together with Ecco's part so well, leaving no empty space in the song, creating a super high energy Drain Gang track full of perfect performances from every single member. Especially Ecco's chorus is just unbelievable, with him starting it off in this deeper voice until transitioning super smoothly into a higher voice, and it just hits so hard. I think Western Union is the perfect Drain Gang track. Like if you were trying to get someone into Drain Gang, this should be the track you're showing them first. Another track I love on this record is 1-to-1, which is a track from Ecco and Thaiboy featuring Lean. 1-to-1 is a perfect example of the E style production on this record, as this beat very much sounds like it could be on E. So with that, I find it kind of cool to see other people in this production style, as both Lean and Thaiboy do great on this, with them both matching the melancholic atmosphere that the song presents. Trash Island, in my opinion, is the best possible introduction to Drain Gang, as it has great performances from all members, has tracks similar to their old style, and tracks more like their new style, giving a diverse scope of Drain Gang sound only in a short 22 minutes. So if you're watching this and for some reason haven't listened to Drain Gang before, I really recommend starting with this. Legendary Member is Thaiboy's first solo album, following 2 albums with Drain Gang and 2 solo mixtapes. Legendary Member, in my opinion, is easily his best project, having a really solid track list with a great wide variety of sounds from trap to pop rap. Though Thaiboy does perform in all these styles really well, my personal favorite genre he tries out on this album is pop rap. A great example of this more pop-oriented sound succeeding is Lip Service with Ecco2K, which is my personal favorite off the record. Thaiboy performs a really fun casual flow, backed by this sort of indie pop trap beat by Good, that's really bouncy and is really what makes the song. Then in between these great Thaiboy verses, there's a chorus from Ecco with some really interesting pitching and effects on vocals. Along with pop cuts in here, there are also a lot of trap cuts that feel somewhat inspired by Playboi Carti. Especially the opener to the album, Drains That Rock, which feels like a fusion of the typical Drain Gang cloud rap beat mixed with a rage beat that Carti would be on. Not only that, but Thaiboy's lyrical choice of pretty much just saying the same thing over and over again the whole track, on top of the vocal choice of having a pretty similar inflection to Carti. Despite all these similarities, this still sounds like its own thing, being a fusion between Drain Gang's laid-back cloud rap style, fused with Carti's in-your-face rage style. Then on top of all these new styles for Thaiboy, there are obviously some classic cloud rap tracks such as I Don't Give a Fuck, which is just an absolute classic Thaiboy track with just such an infectious melodic hook. Along with that, there's some background vocals from Ecco that help give the song more depth. Then for the lyrical end, I also love this song as it's just raw positivity from Thaiboy, talking about how he doesn't give a fuck about the haters. That aspect of Thaiboy's music is something I really appreciate, as Ecco and Bladee usually have depressive themes that can just sometimes be too heavy. But Thaiboy has albums full of these super unserious and just fun tracks that you can dance to. Legendary Member is the first instance of Thaiboy proving he can put together a quality solo album with interesting ideas and a decent amount of variety, solidifying Thaiboy Goon as a legendary member. E by Ecco2K is in my opinion the epitome of Drain Gang's work, being a harsh, cold, and very emotional project, done to a level never seen before by any of Drain Gang. With minimalist electronic production from mostly Yves Tumor, Good, and Whitearmor, that makes the record feel like you're walking through a cold, depressing winter night. Though this album's production is unbelievable in its own right, the writing on this is just as strong, being more vivid and vulnerable than ever before for Drain Gang. There's a quote from an Echo interview with 032C magazine that I feel very well describes how this album feels. Echo says in reference to his music videos, "I don't like to try to make things look like something they're not. I always have this very documentary and natural style to the way things look. I'm trying to express that there's beauty and magic here, but without putting special effects on it, without making things look pretty or beautiful. I always want to illustrate that there is much more here than what you see." It's the same with the music as well. I don't really separate them too much in my mind either to begin with. They're portraying something romantic in a way that is quite brutal, dirty, or ugly. You want to make something that feels real. With the video stuff, you want it to look like something that really happened. This is also the first Drain Gang record to be pop focused, with the whole record being avant-garde/art pop. Something I absolutely love about this record is how it's sequenced, creating this beautiful experience, specifically having AAA Powerline as an opener and having Blue Eyes as a closer, as to me it creates a really interesting sonic contradiction, with the album beginning on a soft and minimal track and then ending on the most abrasive and intense track on the album, making it feel perfectly balanced. Unlike a lot of other albums featured in this video, I really feel like E has a lot going on lyrically. So I'm going to be individually analyzing a lot of the songs from this record, as I personally have connections to a lot of the tracks, and then also there's just like a lot to dig into. I feel the best place to start when talking about E would be the opening track, AAA Powerline, which introduces a big theme of the project, that being substance abuse. This is introduced in the repetition of the lines in the chorus. With the first line describing Echo using these substances, followed by the effects these drugs have on him, such as nausea, disassociation from reality, and sometimes disassociation so bad that it can lead to loss of control of the body. Following this extensive chorus, there's a brief bridge that has this line I specifically want to focus on. That line being, "Will I ever be whole again?" Which is very obviously Echo questioning if he will ever get better mentally and get over his substance abuse problems. After this, it leads into the chorus once again. This repetitive nature of the track is supposed to be a representation of Echo's lack of change, showing that the substance abuse is a relentless cycle that he can't escape. The next track I want to talk about is the most popular track off E, that being Peroxide. Peroxide follows a similar theme to the track before AAA Powerline, except this time it adds another theme, that being the ostracization Echo felt being black and growing up in Sweden. The track once again opens with Echo talking about how he's doing drugs, with the use of rocks to once again represent drugs that come in solid rock form or crystal form, such as cocaine or ketamine. After this, the track goes into the theme of ostracization, talking about how many people stare and look at him weird, as there are very few black people in Sweden. But he perseveres and goes along with his day, as it's unfortunately become a daily experience. Alternatively, the line "every day go the same, gotta stay strong" could be Echo talking about his substance abuse and the repetitive cycle it's put him in. Following this verse, it leads into the chorus that further dives into racism Echo faces, with the chorus beginning with the lines, "Something feels so wrong, it's the way I look or it's the way I walk." Once again talking about how people will judge him based on his race in everyday interactions. Preceding this, Echo talks about how some people are even afraid of him based on this stereotype that black men are hyperviolent and aggressive. The line after this then gives an explanation to the title of the track, with Echo saying he embraces his race despite the discrimination he faces as Peroxide bleaches things lighter, such as hair. Echo then further analyzes people's idea of him due to his race, with the lines, with this line about getting robbed being a reference to the stereotype that black people steal. The next track I want to talk about is Calcium. Calcium further goes into the theme of substance abuse, with the track opening romanticizing his addiction, phrasing the verse in a way where it sounds like he's addressing a lover. I'm alone with you now, you're my only one. After this verse, there's a refrain that further explains Echo's addiction problem, followed by the chorus that contains the iconic line, reinforcing the theme that this track is romanticizing his addiction. The second verse then further speaks on the negatives of his addiction, recalling an experience where he thought he was going to die, comparing his situation to late actor Marilyn Monroe as she had passed away due to an overdose. Echo then talks about his most likely drug-induced paranoia, saying that he sees people. The track then goes on with a chorus, bridge, and then an outro that once again repeats the line, "Double K crystals, kiss my nose," which, similar to AAA Powerline, also reinforces the repetitive nature of his addiction. The next track I want to talk about is Security, which is a track that, while mentioning Ecco's substance abuse, mainly focuses on a new subject for E, that being insecurities with his appearance. Despite this track being mainly focused on insecurity, the track begins once again talking about Ecco's substance abuse, speaking of hallucinations of his while singing. Soon after, the track dives into the topic of insecurity in the lines, "Tell me how something so beautiful can taste so foul," which from my interpretation of things could mean one of two things. Firstly, this could be Ecco referring to someone that he finds beautiful, but on the inside they're ugly. Alternatively, this could be Ecco referring to himself, where despite other people telling him he's beautiful, he can't find that within himself, making something so beautiful on the outside to others taste so foul on the inside to Ecco internally. Preceding this intro is the chorus of the track that begins with the repeating of the line, "So beautiful, so perfect," which is Ecco admiring someone for their beauty, being envious, wishing he looked as good as them. The following lines further enforce this idea. The word security is supposed to represent that this person is confident and has security, the opposite of insecurity. This envy is then talked about further, with the line saying that because of how beautiful Ecco finds this person, it makes him feel much worse about himself. This chorus is followed by a verse that further digs into Ecco's insecurity, starting with the lines, talking about how he can't sleep due to his body dysmorphia, and it has gotten so bad to where he disassociates from himself. The verse then continues with him wishing that he could change things about his appearance to be happier with himself, along with further explanation of how severe his body dysmorphia is. The final track off E that I want to talk about is the closing track to the album, that being Blue Eyes, which, though having a very brief runtime of only 1.5 minutes, is still very strong thematically. Backed by a beautifully abrasive instrumental, Blue Eyes closes off E with a theme continuously seen throughout the album. That being the racism Ecco faces living in Sweden, more specifically the ostracization he feels growing up being black in Sweden. This track perfectly encapsulates his feeling of being out of place with harsh vocals, instrumentals, and blunt lyrics, with the repetition of the line, "All my friends got blue eyes, all my friends got blue eyes," backed by harsh screams of pain. E is definitely my favorite project to come out of Drain Gang, with super vulnerable writing along with atmospheres created in the production so cold and isolating that it really builds a world around the album. Then on top of this album paved the way for more pop-focused Drain Gang projects that will be talked about later in this video, such as Crest or Spiderr. EXETER is a very short album from Bladee, produced by Good, and displays a really captivating art pop sound mixed with Blade's classic cloud rap style. This creates a project of interesting vocal layering and minimalistic production, resulting in a mystical sounding record. Despite this being Blade's shortest album, having a runtime of 18 minutes, this is one of my most played Bladee projects, as this 18 minutes is full of exclusively phenomenal tracks, especially the 2 tracks with Ecco, as the production was just meant for Ecco's high-pitched vocals, like the chorus he has on Wonderland is just perfect. Another track I love off EXETER is Mirror Him Intro. While though being so minimalistic lyrically, it is truly so dense, with a few lines that are said on it meaning so much. Backed by a music box-like instrumental, Bladee repeats a few lines, all ending with "the way," beginning with "Mirror in the way," which is Bladee saying how the way people perceive themselves stops them from trying to achieve what they want, putting themselves in a box. This is followed by the line "follow all the way," which is Bladee saying how people don't develop as their own person, only being in the shadow of other people rather than being themselves. This line is then followed by "window in the way," which is saying how people let their perceptions of others get in the way of achieving success in their own life. By seeing these other people through the window do better than them in life, it demotivates them from trying, making them feel lesser than, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. There's then the line "ego in the way," which I feel is the most self-explanatory line, with it simply being that people's ego gets in the way of them achieving. The next lines change from Bladee addressing the listener to then addressing himself, saying "I go all the way" / "I'm not in the way," meaning that he doesn't let self-image, ego, perception of others, etc. get in the way of him living his life to the fullest, achieving to the best of his ability and going all the way. I really love this song, as lyrically it presents such a positive idea addressed to the listener, backed by this absolutely beautiful instrumental from Good. Another song I love off this record is Love Story, which is just a classic Bladee and Ecco track, with this super interesting production from Good that has distorted 808s paired with once again music box-like melodies. Then lyrically this track is nice but nothing crazy, with it talking about how this girl is so perfect that it makes Bladee feel like he's in a love story. EXETER is the first of 3 records from Bladee in 2020, with great writing and vocal performances from Bladee and 2 great Ecco features, along with intriguing production from Good that makes the project as great as it is. 333, mostly produced by Whitearmor, used to be my favorite Bladee record, and still is one of my favorites, having this super lush and magical sound that is so easy to get immersed in, with this album sounding just like its beautiful album cover. This album sonically is really interesting to me, as it takes a bunch of different sounds from past Bladee records, dance, pop, cloud rap, trap, ambient, digicore, etc., and then fuses them all along with this soft atmosphere, creating an extremely versatile yet cohesive project. 333 opens with a beautifully vulnerable acoustic track, Wings in Motion, which, with the metaphor of having wings, talks about the push and pull of happiness and depression in Blade's life. With the line, ripples broken wings in motion, which is metaphorically saying how his happiness is broken by these ripples in his flight, preventing him from living life to the fullest. Another song with a similar theme of ups and downs is Hundreds, which has a chorus that talks about how he spends and makes money rapidly, which could possibly be metaphor for the aforementioned ups and downs / highs and lows he feels in life. This would make sense, connecting this theme to the verse, which talks about paranoia he feels, along with talking about how he works hard to neglect his problems rather than confronting them. The final track I want to talk about off 333 is Innocent of All Things, which talks about Bladee putting blame on others for his issues and mistakes instead of taking responsibility. The track opens with the lines,
It's not hard to see that you ruined me. Can't believe it's real. Oh, it gets hard to see. I confess it's me.
which is Bladee blaming this person for ruining his life until coming to the harsh realization that he's done this to himself. A much harder conclusion to come to than simply blaming your problems on somebody else. This leads into the chorus with the repetition of the line, innocent of all things, further solidifying this idea of putting blame on others for problems that he knows deep down are his own fault. The repeating of innocent of all things is mirrored by the repetition of Cinderella walking, being a metaphor for supposed innocence, as in the classic story of Cinderella, she is the innocent victim of others' mistreatment. There's then a second verse that doesn't really seem to add to the theme, but instead seems to be about Bladee reminiscing about being with someone and the loneliness he feels now being away from them. But you could possibly connect this to the theme of the track, in that this is the person that Bladee was pushing blame onto, and this reveals that this person made Bladee feel better, not worse. This track is then closed by an outro that reiterates the chorus, representing that though Bladee is aware of his passing of the blame, he continues to do it. 333 is a fantastic Bladee release that further establishes not only Bladee as a great artist, but also Whitearmor as an absolutely generational producer, having unique sound after unique sound with everything he works on. Under the alias of DJ BILLYBOOL, Thaiboy Digital released a trance EP. This EP is really not my thing. I think it's really boring and one of the worst String Gang releases. But I will give it one thing, and that is that it has a lot of charm. Like how he completely pretends that DJ BILLYBOY and Thaiboy are different people is so funny to me. Like on the track Full Moon where he shouts out himself. Then following one of the worst String Gang releases, there's once again another pretty bad String Gang release. That being the collaboration album between Bladee and producer Mechatok. This might be the only String Gang project that I have absolutely nothing good to say about. Just imagine if you took Blade's cool pop/dance sound he was experimenting with on his recent records, then just stripped it of all its charm and unique elements, and that's how you end up with good luck. It's odd too because Mechatok has some great stuff with String Gang, like production credits on E, on top of songs like Helium and Pollen, both amazingly produced by him. But on this, it just sounds like Bladee and Mecha are giving it their worst. This creates a soulless, boring, and extremely non-innovative String Gang record. Exactly the opposite to the typical String Gang release in the worst way possible. With that, I've noticed a pattern in who likes this record and who doesn't. People who like this record generally seem to be people who can't get into Blade's other stuff, and people who really love Blade's other stuff generally seem to not like this record, which makes a good amount of sense as it's a lot more accessible than the average String Gang record, making it possible as a good starting point for people getting into Bladee despite its personal lack of quality in my opinion. Self-described as sounding like throwing a car battery into a washing machine, Pixie is a 12-minute EP from Ecco2K and is an absolute masterpiece, being full of beautiful riffs with harsh, abrasive guitar tones sung over by Ecco's angelic, high-pitched vocals. This project has such an amazing, unique sound that's like nothing I've ever heard before and nothing I've been able to find anywhere else. For that reason, I've listened to this EP a lot, with me having over 400 plays on this 6-track EP. Due to the brief yet lyrically dense nature of this EP, I'm going to cover each track individually, as there's lots to dissect in each of these tracks. Pixie is opened by its title track, which is more of a sound collage than a proper song, serving as an introduction of sorts to the extremely polarizing sound of the EP. I just absolutely love how the song starts, starting with isolated vocals of Ecco2K saying,
"Turn inside out to the outside within,"
which beautifully introduces the main theme of this project, that being body dysmorphia and struggling with identity. Then immediately following these lines, the track hits you with a harsh wall of sound, wonderfully introducing the harsh and chaotic nature of the EP. The title track of the EP then segues into the first proper song of the EP.
Okay, so the first track is called In the Flesh.
In the Flesh is definitely the most traditional song on the EP, and with that, the most popular. This track talks about Echo not feeling like he can be himself around other people, stated beautifully in the verse with the lines, Echo uses a lot of body metaphors on this track, going to the extent of using body horror in his songwriting, shown in lines like, with this idea of destroying/killing your old self to become the person you truly are. Following this verse, it leads into the bridge that talks of Echo's desires, with Echo saying that he wants to meet someone he feels comfortable being his true self around, so he can actually enjoy himself and have fun, rather than constantly having to worry about others' perception of him. He then further talks about his desire to feel a sense of self, to feel human, to have identity, as when he's putting on this act of being someone he is not, it causes him to feel lost, without self, without a human form that is true to him. The last section I want to talk about from this track is the chorus, and specifically the lines, what these lines are saying is someone is telling Echo to get help with his issues, leading to him only rhetorically asking, is this all there is to it? As getting help through a therapist or something like that won't fix him, and the only thing that can is himself, by expressing himself as his true self, by accepting his true self and being that person openly. The track following in the Flesh is Jealous, which is a stripped down acoustic track, being very minimalistic compared to most of Pixie. Jealous once again speaks about his identity, but now from the third person, with Echo talking about himself as if it's someone else, due to him feeling so disconnected from the person he presents as. The general tone of the track almost sounds like Echo is shit-talking himself, with there being a lot of talking down in lines such as, why you gotta act so jealous? You want it, you want it, you want it, you want it. Hella toxic, so precious. You want it, you want it, you want it, you want it. Why you gotta act so headless? You want it, you want it, you want it, you want it. Nothing works, nothing special. You want it. What these lines could be is a resentment Echo has towards himself for acting the way he does around others, instead of expressing his true self. The next line I want to mention is, you want something you won't get, huh? Which is once again Echo talking down to himself, saying that he'll never be the person that he wants to be. The final piece I want to talk about from this track is the second verse, which opens up the possibility that Jealous could be actually talking about another person. As the track begins talking about a toxicity developing between Echo and another person, leading to Echo mocking this person in the chorus, where with this it builds into a more harsh and chaotic sound of like this toxic relationship boiling up, until finally coming for the second and final verse where Echo admits that though he has quite the distaste for this person, he still loves them. Also, the line, and I don't want to be your dream boy anymore, could connect to either possible narrative of the song, as the dream boy is the person he presents himself as to the world, the version of himself that people want to see, rather than the version of himself that he truly is. The track then ends with Echo saying the Swedish word to hello, obviously representing Echo going back to this person, trying to make the relationship work again. The track following Jealous is No Song. No Song is a pretty short track, only being a minute and a half, but that minute and a half is full of such a lush sound paired with great songwriting. No Song is where Echo finally understands his identity and comes to terms with it, shown specifically in the phrase I get it, which is scattered throughout the track. Besides this main theme, the track also uses the metaphor of bricks and concrete to explain various subjects. The first use of this metaphor is in the chorus, where he compares himself to a brick trying to fit in among all the other bricks in the wall, trying to conform. The other example of this metaphor is by using the saying of being stonewalled by another person. And if you don't know what it means, stonewalled means being shut off/ignored by somebody. From here, there's once again the phrase I get it, then followed by the line I've got to give it up whenever you come around. Further talking about how this person had stonewalled Echo, with this line saying that Echo has to give his true self up around this person, as they don't support Echo expressing himself. This also further contextualizes the phrase I get it, as it could be Echo coming to the realization not only that he needs to come to terms with how he feels and embrace that, but also that he needs to rid his life of people who do not support him in how he chooses to live. Then there's the closing track to the EP Pixie, that though having vocals are unintelligible, but some interpretations people have made are I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a body, or I'm alive, I'm alive. I personally prefer the interpretation I'm alive, I'm alive, as it acts as a conclusion of sorts to the story of Pixie, with Echo finally being fully himself, making him feel alive, making him feel like someone. Also, though I said this was the final track, technically there's one more if you count the hidden track on the CD version, and I still briefly want to mention this track as it's just so great. It sort of sounds like a Vampire Weekend song in the style of Pixie. I really recommend checking it out if you haven't heard it yet. Pixie is a second example of Echo being an extremely capable solo artist, with another masterful project after the last. This EP also has a feat I almost never see be done. That is creating a narratively cohesive EP. This EP is entirely written and produced by Echo, so I'm really excited for whatever solo work he has coming next. The Fool is not officially a collaboration album, but pretty much is, as every track on here is produced by Rip Squad's Lucy. The Fool proved once again that Lucy/Rip Squad paired with Bladee is just always simply amazing. Though the production style is pretty different from Icedancer, it does feel somewhat similar in that the chemistry Lucy and Bladee have is just great. The Fool once again further leans into a pop sound, but done much better than Blade's previous record Good Luck. As on here, instead of completely giving his sound a 180, it takes a sound that Bladee fans are familiar with and adjusts it. With that, Bladee works better and sounds more alive on these beats compared to the Mechatok instrumentals. And also it creates an actually cool sound instead of just giving a generic dance pop sound like Good Luck did. Thematically, The Fool explores ideas of nature and spirituality with lyricism from Bladee that references folktales, uses metaphors of being an angel with wings, and things of that sort. I just love this lyrical style that Bladee goes into, especially with his more recent releases, as I feel it perfectly matches the ethereal pop adjacent production of his more recent stuff. It creates just such a unique style, like you don't see anyone else rapping about St. George the Dragon Slayer. Anyways, to get into the tracks on this record, I think my favorite off The Fool has to be the hit Hotel Breakfast. This track is just energetic perfection, with the beat instantly picking up into this bouncy feel that I just love, paired with an amazing Bladee performance backed by his breathy ad-libs that I love so much. On top of all this chorus is easily one of the most iconic Drain Gang hooks ever, being so unserious, talking about popping like a toast, with playful delivery from Bladee matching the bouncy feel of the beat. Another track I love off this record is the Fool intro, which is just a fantastic opening track to the album, with it immediately bombarding you with a super energetic trap beat with these really cool synths all layered together. Along with that, Bladee has this really interesting high-pitched vocal performance. Lyrically, this track also works perfectly as an intro as it sets up the spiritual themes of the record, with the track being focused around the idea of confessing your sins. The Fool is another great Bladee record that, while staying somewhat based in his original sound, does take risks in the production and vocal performances. All risks that paid off in creating a very interesting sound that is so replayable. Crest is a collaborative album between Ecco and Bladee, produced entirely by Whitearmor. To me, this album acts as a culmination of sorts for the dance pop sound Bladee and Ecco had been experimenting with in years prior, with records like Good Luck, EXETER, and Pixie. But before I talk about Crest, I want to talk about Amygdala, produced by Mechatok, that despite not being included on the album, very much feels like a precursor to Crest, being an introduction to the very distinct sound heard on Crest. Not only the sound, but also a strong shift in style of songwriting, of heavily referencing mythic phenomenons. Even though mysticism is like a theme used on various other Bladee records like 333, this style is even more prominent here, especially in Blade's writing. Some examples of this in Amygdala is Bladee referencing Valhalla, which is a palace in Norse mythology, and Bladee referencing the Elysian Fields from Greek mythology. Now that I've established the themes of Amygdala and Crest as a whole, I'll now actually examine what Amygdala talks about. The track begins with a verse from Bladee that calls back to many themes and phrases he used in the past, such as dreaming in a dream and destroying create, being another way of representing this theme of loss is gain, a theme commonly heard in many Drain Gang tracks. This then leads into a verse from Ecco that speaks about the balance of emotions in life, and how you cannot have the bad without the good/good without the bad. This is shown in many examples of contradicting things, such as sun and moon, fear and love, light and dark, etc. The verse then further pushes the theme with the repetition of the lines, everything a part of you, explaining that all of the universe is a part of you and something cannot exist without its contradiction, as to have balance. You could also connect this theme to Blade's earlier verse with the line destroying create, marrying the theme of contradiction in Ecco's verse. Now to get into the tracks on the actual album, the first thing I want to talk about is what I think to be easily the best track off Crest, and possibly the best song to ever come out of Drain Gang. That song being 5-Star Crest for Vaden Rum, which is technically 5 songs in one track, but I see it as one cohesive song that are in tribute to Drain Gang affiliate Vaden Rum, who had passed away in 2019. The first part of 5-Star Crest for Vaden Rum has 3 verses, 2 from Ecco and 1 from Bladee, backed by a relatively soft instrumental. Opening with Ecco's verse that uses themes of nature and earth to describe how he's feeling, a style used in the past by various Drain Gang members. In this verse, Ecco talks about how when he closes his eyes, everything gets so dark and hopeless, using the metaphor of the sky in the lines.
Close my eyes and the sun starts shining. Close my eyes and the sky falls down on me.
This could be metaphorically explaining insomnia Ecco is dealing with, where during the day everything is fine, but as he tries to rest, all his negative thoughts bombard him. As said in the first line of the verse, his nightmares find him. This then leads into Blade's verse, where he moves on to a different subject, opening by referencing the title, until moving into his mystical songwriting that for this verse I couldn't really draw any themes from, as I think the verse more so acts as a thematic introduction to the track, rather than actually trying to say anything. This is then followed by the third and final verse of the first star of the 5-Star Crest delivered by Ecco. In this verse, Ecco mirrors this theme of contradiction he had talked about on Amygdala, this time referencing Hinduism with fountainheads symbolizing creation and arrowheads symbolizing destruction. This is followed by the line loss and gain, a very common theme in Drain Gang songs, and how loss is gain. This then leads us to the second star of the Crest, which takes a very polarizing shift from a soft and cold song into this very colorful and bright poppy song. This part is exclusively Bladee and enforces a positive theme of excelling in life and reaching the highest of your potential, doing anything the absolute best you can. This is shown in the line. Then the following line, go round again and again for the perfect win, makes a connection to Hinduism for the second time on the track, referencing the belief in samsara. Samsara is the belief of the near endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. How this connects to the idea of performing to your highest is that to be liberated from samsara, you need to perform well spiritually in life to reach moksha, the liberation of the spirit from samsara, connecting back to Bladee talking about excelling in everything and going through life using the best of your abilities. This now brings us to the third star in the 5-star Crest, with the section including Just Echo, while continuing the upbeat pop sound of the last section. Similar to the last section, the third star is also quite repetitive, with generally the same lines reiterated throughout. The theme of this section is mortality and impermanence. This is displayed in the lines that heaven is fleeting and always and nothing is forever, and wishing will get you nowhere, explaining that wishing won't do anything for you and everything will inevitably come to an end. A few lines later, Echo makes a callback to the arrowhead from the first section, saying,
Funny how I'm always on the head of the arrow.
Possibly meaning that he feels he is the cause for destruction / ruins everything, as the arrowhead represents destruction. Alternatively, connecting back to the theme of mortality, this line could be Echo saying he's suicidal / self-destructive, always being on the head of the arrow, the head of destruction. Following this is obviously the 4th star that is performed by Bladee, continuing the theme of mortality spoken about in the previous section. Bladee begins the section comparing beauty to drug, saying beauty is the drug, I'm the pusher, push it. My interpretation of this is that Bladee is saying that people's obsession with beauty and reaching the standard put in place by society can almost become like an addiction to some. This is followed by the line,
That's why we suffer, do we know?
Possibly being a reference to Buddhism, as suffering and how to end it is a central theme of the religion. How this connects to the line about beauty is that the obsession of beauty is one of the many sufferings felt by humanity. The rest of this section focuses on the line,
Give it to me raw, this is beautiful.
which is Bladee accepting death and being content with the impermanence / mortality of the world that Echo had talked about in the previous section. This leads into the 5th and final star of the 5-star Crest, which is just Echo saying I love you over and over again over this ambient instrumental reminiscent of something you'd hear on E. There are also some other vocals on here I think, but they're not listed on Genius and are like really hard to make out, so I'm just gonna pretend like they're not there. Now that I've covered one song that isn't even on the album and one song way more extensively than I needed to, I will now cover one more track from Crest that I love. That track being White Meadow. Despite having a colorful and bright sound, White Meadow lyrically is on the darker side. White Meadow begins with a verse from Bladee that explains how he feels empty and at a low point. This is shown in the opening lines.
Waves crash down, clouds fly by, then still warm, but I turn cold now. Straight down, clouds pass by.
Explaining how Bladee sees everything pass him by / move on as he stays stagnant, cold, empty, and depressed. The rest of this verse talks about people's desire to reach the unreachable status of perfection, while the only way to find peace is to accept the imperfection, or as said by Bladee, letting the sky fall. This is followed by a verse from Echo which talks about how your past decisions in life can loom over you, and that to be able to live life without having these decisions loom over you, you need to make the best possible choices you can, even in really difficult situations, or as said by Echo, picking the sweetest poison. This is followed by a bridge, then another verse from Echo that I have trouble drawing meaning from, but that doesn't really matter as it sounds really nice. Crest is a generational release from Bladee and Echo, being a grand culmination of this pop sound that they had been crafting over the past few years, reaching absolute perfection with this record, where they both perform masterfully in their writing and vocals, backed by just as masterful instrumentals provided by Whitearmor. In the Abyss, Music for Weddings is the first and only album so far to be released under the Whitearmor name, and is an instrumental album full of ethereal instrumentals leaning more into the ambient side most of the time. Despite Whitearmor having some absolutely generational work with Drain Gang, along with some other very solid solo releases like his 2011 mixtape Rippin Private Bowls, this album feels very underwhelming, with all the songs being evidently well crafted and mixed, but nonetheless kind of boring and the samey with pretty generic structuring. Spiderr is Blade's 10th studio album, produced almost entirely by Whitearmor. Spiderr takes a bit of a step back from the full-on pop sound heard on Crest, and instead feels more reminiscent of The Fool, but a lot more abrasive and in-your-face with super energetic production. Despite this being one of the less liked Bladee albums in the fanbase, I personally really enjoy it, as it just has energetic track after energetic track. I don't think there's any other Bladee album where he puts this much energy into his performances. Bladee really put his all into everything he did on this project. Super interesting vocal inflections, tons of ad-libs that make the tracks feel like they have so much life, and a million vocal layers on every song, making them feel so energetically chaotic. Listen to the debut single for the album, Drain Story, for example. Just listen to that track and really pay attention, and you'll notice how many different elements of Blade's vocals are being used simultaneously, creating an extremely interesting track. Just like most other Bladee records, this album also does a fair amount of experimenting, with tracks like Velociraptor trying out a pop rock dance sort of sound that I think is really cool and suits Bladee really well, especially with the energy puts into his vocals on this project. Another thing about Spiderr that makes it different from other Bladee records is the writing style feels like it takes a little bit of a shift on this album. As at least to me, usually a few tracks on each album have a consistent narrative / theme that you can follow, but with this record, all the tracks feel more like mood pieces rather than trying to tell a story of anything like that. It's not like Bladee hasn't done this before, it's just he has never done it until now for an entire record. So with that, I'm not going to cover the album very extensively due to the sporadic nature of the writing. Also, this doesn't mean that the writing is bad or stupid or whatever due to it being sporadic, but more so that it's simply different, and with that, difficult to draw themes from, and with that, difficult to analyze and talk about. Now to get into the tracks on this album. The first track I want to talk about is I'm Slowly But Surely Losing Hope. I love this track for the insane amount of energy it comes in with immediately. On top of this, the lyricism perfectly matches how chaotic this track feels, with distressed writing that almost feels like a call for help, talking about how Bladee feels out of control of himself with how rapidly he goes up and down emotionally. Opening with the lines, which though being a common theme in Blade's writing, it feels especially personal here, as it feels like he's at a tipping point with these rapid contradicting emotions, due to the aggressive / distressed delivery. Another track I love for its super intensely chaotic energy is Haha, which might be one of the most fun tracks Bladee has ever put out. Opening with the line I'm crazy repeated over and over again with the most insane vocals from Bladee that are so entertaining, which then leads into a verse with playful Bladee lyricism along with sound effects that just add to the immense amount of charm this track already has. This is just such a simply charismatic, catchy track that I always want to play over and over again for the little moments that are so fun. Despite being nowhere near his best, Spiderr is a great album from Bladee, presenting some new and interesting ideas, along with some tracks reminiscent of other beloved Bladee albums like The Fool. Back to Life is Thaiboy's sophomore album, and in my opinion is really nothing crazy. It's definitely of quality and I do enjoy it when I listen to it, it's just that I never really feel like coming back to it. I think that's because anything you hear on this record, you can find on Thaiboy's debut, Legendary Member. What I'm saying is this record's issue is its lack of innovation, trying absolutely nothing new, being the exact opposite of most Dren Gang projects, which take risks and experiment with new sounds. It's not even like Back to Life is an improvement on the sound presented on Legendary Member, it's literally just the exact same, if not slightly worse. With that, I don't want to just shit on this album, as its great tracks are some of Dren Gang's hardest bangers. This is especially true for The Kingdom, where Bladee opens the track floating on this insane beat. Then this great energy is carried throughout the rest of the track by a great performance from Thaiboy. That's all I have to say about this record, as like I said before, there's not much going on here that's very interesting, so I simply don't have much to say. Though it's currently 2024, the last year I'm covering is 2022, as in 2023 the only things to come out of Dren Gang were a few Boiler Room sets and a Bladee single. Then 2024 just started, so there obviously isn't anything to talk about yet, but hopefully Dren Gang gives us a few new albums this year, as 2023 is I'm pretty sure their least active year to date. This is my longest video to date due to Dren Gang's huge discography, and I'm really glad I took the time to dig deep into these songs' lyrics, as Dren Gang has some severely underrated writing at times, with tracks like 5-Star Crest, For Vat and Rum. Anyways, that's all I have to talk about. If you enjoyed this, subscribe because I have a video like this out on the 27th of every single month.